In the hours after the September 11th attacks, the White House established a strict, unyielding rule. The United States would no longer draw a line between terrorist networks and the governments that sheltered them. That doctrine pointed directly at Afghanistan, where the Taliban regime had provided a safe haven for Osama bin Laden and his Al-Qaeda network. But invading Afghanistan presented a geographical nightmare. The country is dominated by the Hindu Kush, a sprawling, deeply fractured mountain range that makes centralized control virtually impossible and large-scale military movement incredibly difficult. In 2001, the U.S. Army was not built for this kind of remote, high-altitude guerrilla fighting. They were trained and equipped primarily to maneuver massive armored divisions against conventional armies or to conduct localized peacekeeping missions. The administration wanted a rapid, decisive strike. But deploying hundreds of thousands of conventional troops to navigate this terrain risked a repeat of the 1980s, when the Soviet Union spent a decade bleeding out in an Afghan quagmire. To destroy the Taliban without becoming a massive, slow-moving target themselves, military planners had to design a completely untested model for regime change. Central Command bypassed the standard playbook. Instead of sending large divisions, they deployed microscopic teams of CIA operatives and special forces to embed directly with local militias who were already fighting the Taliban. In the north, this meant deploying Task Force Dagger. Small units like Alpha Team 595 flew into the mountains at night to link up with a loose confederation known as the Northern Alliance. Their primary partner was General Abdul Rashid Dostum, an Uzbek warlord commanding roughly 2,000 fighters who sought to reclaim Mazar-e-Sharif. Because the terrain was far too rugged for standard vehicles, Dostum's men operated on foot and on horseback. To keep up, the elite U.S. operators had to request airdrops of Western-style saddles and ride directly into firefights. But these horsemen carried distinctly modern equipment. The Special Forces teams brought satellite communication gear and laser designators to pinpoint Taliban tanks, artillery, and troop formations. Those lasers guided a massive advantage lingering high above the clouds, U.S. Air Force heavy bombers waiting to drop precision-guided munitions on painted targets. The results were devastating. The aerial bombardments shattered Taliban defensive lines, destroying their armored vehicles and causing massive concussions that sent surviving defenders fleeing in panic. Supported by his air cover, Dostum's cavalry charged forward, forcing the Taliban to abandon the heavily fortified Tiangi Pass. By November 10th, the Taliban surrendered thousands of fighters and lost control of Mazar-e-Sharif entirely. By combining 19th-century mobility with the devastating payload of modern aerospace technology, a handful of Americans and a local militia had cracked the Taliban's northern stronghold wide open. Down south, the military faced a very different political landscape. They could not send the Northern Alliance warlords below the Hindu Kush because southern Afghanistan was the Pashtun heartland and the cultural birthplace of the Taliban. To take the south, the Americans needed local Sunni Pashtun leaders who commanded enough tribal respect to turn the population against the regime. The CIA recommended Hamid Karzai, a charismatic tribal leader whose family had a long history of resisting foreign invaders and who harbored a deep vendetta against the Taliban for assassinating his father. In mid-November, Alpha Team 574 landed in the remote Uruzgan province to arm, equip, and advise Karzai's rapidly growing force. Together, they incited local uprisings in culturally critical towns like Tarin Kot, proving to the local population that Taliban forces could actually be defeated in the open. With the Taliban distracted by Karzai's growing militia pushing from the north, another U.S. team partnered with former Governor Gul Agha Sharzai to push up Highway 4 from the southeast, creating a pincer movement aimed directly at Kandahar. As the U.S. leveled Taliban defenders with continuous airstrikes, local citizens in the south realized the regime's grip was breaking. Outgunned and losing public support, Taliban leadership finally negotiated the surrender of Kandahar in early December. By tapping into the specific tribal dynamics of the region and backing them with overwhelming firepower, the military managed to hollow out the Taliban's control from the inside out. The immediate tactical success was staggering. In under 2 months, a coalition of local fighters, backed by an incredibly small footprint of U.S. operators, had completely deposed a national regime. This swift military victory paved the way for a political resolution. In Germany, the United Nations convened a special conference to formally install Hamid Karzai as the leader of Afghanistan's new interim government. But this victory held a fatal structural flaw. The entire strategy had been built on funding and empowering an array of heavily armed, fiercely independent, and historically fractured regional warlords. Military planners had successfully executed their goal of destroying Al-Qaeda's base. What they lacked was any kind of master plan for securing a unified, stable nation in the aftermath. The brilliant, unconventional shortcuts that kept the United States from fighting a massive conventional war in 2001 quietly laid the foundation for the longest, most complicated conflict in American history.